and welcome to the Living Life Differently podcast. We are the Mahojos. I'm Amy.
And I'm Ali, and we live in a static caravan on a farm in South Wales with our son Ollie and our dog Dizzy.
We're currently on a year off together, waiting patiently to get going on a European campervan adventure.
In the meantime, we decided to set up this podcast to share stories of women who are living life differently, women who are doing things different to the norm.
So, if you're feeling a little stuck in life or need confidence to make some big changes, then keep listening as we have some brilliant guests.
In this episode, we speak with Louise Dumayne, who moved from the UK to the Yukon Wilderness in Canada with her husband Neil.
Listen as she tells us all about her decision to leave and the challenges of wilderness life. Enjoy!
Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Living Life Differently podcast, and we are delighted and excited to have with us today a lady called Louise Dumayne. We're not going to say where she's calling from because we want Louise to tell you all about where she is in the world because we're super excited. So Louise, over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself, your age, where you live, who you live with. Yeah, hit us with it.
All right, I'll do my best, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This is really exciting, and there've been some really good stories already. So thank you so much for inviting me on. So my name is Louise Dumaine, and I live completely in the wilderness in the northwest of Canada, in the subarctic, and I live on the Yukon River in a log cabin, and basically we're just in the middle of thousands and thousands of square miles of forests and mountains, and I live on the traditional territory of the Trontek-Wicend, so we're very grateful and honoured to be able to live here. And I live here with my husband and Neil and my dog.
Oh, what's your dog's name?
Homer. He's an old Alaskan Husky, a retired sled dog, retired early sled dog. He's not that old, but he just wasn't that good at it, so he got retired, and we've got him as a pet.
Oh, love him. For anyone listening, we've got Ollie with us at the moment, and Amy, obviously. You might hear him gurgling in the background, and he might need to make a sharp exit unless he settles. But yeah, we're trying to do this as a family, so let's see how we get on. So, killer question.
So Lou, how did you end up living in the Yukon out of all the places in the world?
Well, it's actually a really long story, so I'll sort of do my best to not make it the full podcast, but so I'll try and sort of bullet point things a little bit. But it was kind of my dream as a little girl, really, to live in a log cabin in Alaska. I just sort of had always wanted to. And we actually started, we're in Canada now, but we actually started in Alaska, in the Alaskan Wilderness. And it'd always been my dream. And I'm 50 now, and I got to my late 20s, which felt like really, really old at the time. You know, like I might be kind of dead soon or something. So I sort of thought, before I get to 30, when I get to 30, I've got to start doing the things I always dreamt of. And this was like way before people talked about bucket lists, but I knew I'd always wanted to go to Alaska. So I did like the cheapest holiday that I could find there, which is expensive. You know, it's not a cheap country to get to. And I think it was called Camp America, the company. And you know, they get like a load of you, and you basically book a place in a van, and they take you around to different campsites at different places in Alaska, you know. And it's sort of a van load of Brits and Kiwis and Aussies, and you know, it was a really good laugh. And so I went to Alaska to sort of achieve my dream and just kind of do a holiday there. And it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was kind of everything I thought it would be, which was wonderful, because often, you know, places can be, you know, they're not what you thought, but it was just wonderful. And then totally randomly, we were at a toga party in Anchorage, which is, you know, the kind of thing you really did on that trip. And I met a woman who knew me, like she recognized me. She came across the room and she said, "You're an actor, aren't you?" Because that's what I've always done for a living. I was an actor, not famous at all, but she knew me because she was an actor as well. She had been, and we'd met at the Edinburgh Festival. And she was now living in Anchorage with her husband, who was in the oil industry. And we got chatting, and kind of a lot of it came through this connection, through this amazing friends of mine. We're still friends, Joe and Justice, because I said to her that I'd really love to come back in the winter. That's what my kind of fantasy was, because obviously I'd gone there in the summer when you could drive around, but I wanted to go back in the winter. And I said, but I can't afford it. You know, it's really difficult to travel in Alaska in the winter. You can't just sort of drive around in a bus and stay in campgrounds. And she said, well, if you want to come back, come and stay at our place. And it was just an amazing offer. And through that, I did go back, I think, either that winter or the winter afterwards. And I booked a dog sled tour, which was another dream of mine, to go like into the wilderness with huskies on a dog sled. And I did this amazing trip up into the Arrogetch Peaks in the Arctic, in the Brooks Range, which is a very remote spot. Very few people have ever been there. And it was just astounding. It blew me away, like the beauty of it, and there was this whole other lifestyle that I kind of didn't know existed, of people like just living out in the bush and hunting and trapping, and it just blew me away. And that's kind of what set me on it. But I never, ever in a million years imagined I would live there. Like, never in a million years. You know, this was sort of 20 years ago that this happened. And after that, I became like totally obsessed with it. And yeah, I was an actor, so I wasn't earning very much money at all. I wasn't a successful actor at all. And I was like working in call centers and working in a nightclub and all those kind of things. But I had no kids and I had no commitments. And I was like really lucky. I had a council flat. This was like just at the end of the period when you could get council flats, you know, sort of in the 90s that I got it. So, I mean, it was like gold dust then. And now it's just a kind of dream to have a council flat. So I was really lucky. I lived frugally, and I just basically, at all my work, I saved every penny. And every year or every other year, I would go back to Alaska in the winters and do like dog sledding trips I started off with sort of outfitter companies. And then I got into just finding hunting guides and guides who would just take me out with their own teams. And I just kind of saved to do this. And it was the thing I kind of lived for every year. And then on one trip, I met a couple who lived extremely remote, like flying location. You know, off-grid, off-road, had to get, you know, fly into there. And then they picked me up with dog sled, took me to their cabin. And I just did an amazing trip with them. And we kind of got on. And like, I mean, it sounds kind of insane, and it is kind of insane. I sort of did 2 trips with them. And by that point, I've met my boyfriend at the time, now my husband. And I took him there. You know, like he enjoyed it. It wasn't his kind of thing. But he was like, okay, this is fun. So we kind of got to know each other. And they just said, this was in, I think, 2011 or 2012. They just said, well, why don't you come and live here? Because we need helpers. You know, they always had like helpers there because they had like 50 dogs. And it's a very intense lifestyle living in the bush. You know, they had to fish, catch like thousands of salmon and hunt and things. And they said that we always need people to help, and you love it. So why don't you move here and be helpers for us in the yard, and like help us train the dogs and get them fit for the tourist season and all that kind of thing. And it sounds kind of insane, but I said yes. Neil, my husband, wasn't into it, but I kind of talked him around, and we just went. Yeah, we just went, and it was we were initially just going for a year. I talked him into going for a year just as a kind of break, or to see how it went. But it was just astounding. It was sort of wondrous and magical and dangerous and challenging and difficult. And, you know, we were fishing salmon from a fish wheel, and we were hunting, and we were running dogs every day just out in the bush, just, you know, by ourselves. And it went down to minus 73 Fahrenheit that winter. You know, it was like being on another planet. It was just something else. And that's what really set us, both of us, on like, actually, we want to live here. We want this lifestyle. And also by doing that, we learnt the basics of how to live in the bush. So that was the kind of beginning part. You know, obviously after that, it's a long story, and I'm sure we'll come to other bits of it. But that was how I ended up living in the bush initially.
Wow, and there's so much there to talk about and unpick, and it's really interesting to hear that, you know, you started with this kind of girlhood dream of, you know, living in the wilderness, living in a log cabin, and then got the opportunity, or kind of chased the dream by going out to Camp America, you know, dipping your feet in the snow on the, you know, not at the time, but later on, you know, going out there and actually seeing what it was like. And then kind of, it sounds like you were quite drawn into the lifestyle, the people, and that, you know, you've ended up living there and with your husband out there as well. Absolutely incredible. Do you pinch yourself sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, when in the first few years, to be honest, it felt like we'd walked off the edge of a cliff. And I'm not kidding. You know, the sort of cliche cartoon image where Roadrunner or Wile E. Coyote walks, you know, straight off the edge of the cliff and keeps going, and then goes, what have I done? And falls. Because everything here was so different. We basically abandoned everything we knew. At the age of 42, my husband and my boyfriend, at the time was 43. And we, like, everything is different here. Not obvious things, just like the environment and what you would do for work and that. But like how you dress is completely different. How you shop is completely different. The things you eat are completely different. You have to talk differently because, people here in any part of North America can understand, struggle to understand British dialect sometimes, so it's like we had to completely change ourselves in the most fundamental ways. It was just kind of insane for some time. I mean, that was like 9 years ago now. So now it feels like home. And I'm past that point of continually pinching myself about things, but it took a long time.
Yeah. Lou, I'm just going to pause there. So Ollie and Amy are going to do a runner.
I'm having a nightmare.
Oh, bye, Ollie and Amy. Bye.
I'm seeing him today.
Oh, bless you. Okay, see you in a bit.
It's lovely to meet you. I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Sorry.
Oh, you too.
So before leaving the UK, then obviously you've had this kind of back and forth, going out there, back out again, back out in the winter. You're taking Neil out there. So there's quite a lot of kind of movement between, UK lifestyle and North America lifestyle. Or was it, sorry, you're going back out to Alaska, or did you go to the Yukon previously as well?
To Alaska. We moved to the Yukon later. So that's kind of part of the story. But yes, we started out in Alaska.
Okay, so there's this like going over, coming back again. So what was life like in the UK before that final decision to take the plunge to move to the wilderness?
Well, I mean, it was actually at that point, it was probably better than it had ever been, which sounds completely bizarre. It was a really good point. I mean, I was making a living fully from acting at the time. I mean, it wasn't famous. It wasn't glamorous jobs. A lot of it was kind of corporate acting and touring theatre, but I was actually making a living. I wasn't doing like call centre work or, not working all night in a nightclub or any of those kind of things. And my husband, or boyfriend at the time, his business had folded in the recession, so he hadn't been in a great place. But then a couple of years before we left, he landed like this amazing contract at Sky TV. And it was the first time he'd ever had a salary. I'd never had a salary. So it was like the first time we were living on this incredible salary. And then when you get a high ranking job at a corporation, like a corporate company like that, you get all these freebies, like we were going to the opera, and it was kind of amazing. So ironically, we were in a really good spot at the point that we decided to leave. But I think part of that was sort of realizing, it's like at first you're very, very excited. It's like, oh, we've done it, we've got this, like we can get a mortgage, things that you can't do if you're both self-employed all the time. But also sort of after a bit of that, realizing that actually it was quite hollow, and we chose not to have children. So it was like, you're looking at in your 40s, you're looking at like, oh, well, this is what it'll be. And actually it's fine. I can't complain at all. Life had been much harder than that, in my 20s, but it's like, oh, okay, it's just a little bit hollow. I'm not sure I'll be okay, but I'm not sure I want this for the rest of my life, so I suppose that's kind of where we were at.
Yeah, that's a really interesting word, using the word hollow in terms of that, a bit of emptiness. And I think on previous podcasts, we've talked about that searching for that fulfillment, that, there's something missing, can't quite put your finger on it in life. But obviously you've had this experience abroad that has obviously really excited you and fascinated you. So, do you think that was part of your motivation for the change, is to go and seek out something to fulfill you a bit more than life in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the reasons are quite complex. And to be honest with you, actually, Ali, the reason that I actually moved was that the door opened. Like I literally just had to go through. I don't think there's a chance in a million that we would be living here if it wasn't for the fact that someone just said, do you want to come and live here? Because it felt like I couldn't conceive of living outside of London, let alone doing something daring like moving even to France, let alone like across the world. So it was the fact that the opportunity was there, and that feeling of like, if I don't take it, it'll be gone. It's not going to come round again, every couple of years, this kind of opportunity. But I think also part of it was actually having, struggled for a lot of my life with various, things, and, where we were living and my work and, all those kind of things. When I actually got to the point where I realized I didn't have to struggle, I had a partner that I was happy with, and we had a salary coming in, a good salary. I had acting work, not great work, but I was all right. I think what I realized was I was sort of looking around at people that were more successful than me, so as into where I might end up, and thinking that they don't look happy and I don't feel that happy. And I think I began to feel a bit trapped when I'd always been striving. I thought, there was always something to strive for, and particularly with my own career, which was acting. Once you hit 40 as a female actor, you're heading towards the scrap heap unless you're pretty well known, unless you're a name, or unless you've got a very, very good agent. I'm not saying people never break through, but if you were to look at a graph of how many female actors stop getting work, just turn on the telly and you'll see there's not that much work. So I think it was also a realization of this is going to be as good as it gets, you know. And I knew that, I loved, we used to drive down to the Kent coast at the weekends, and, often I'd go down to Dartmoor because I'm from that part of the country, and hike, and I was loving all those things, but it felt, I suppose, like too rushed and too desperate to just be doing those things at weekends. And I found those things, quite fulfilling. And so I think, it was a kind of a realization that probably what life wasn't ever going to be that fulfilling, and I was always going to be feeling anxious, you know what I mean, about my work or about something, and just sort of thinking, well, I don't really want to go on with this anymore. And I think probably the anxiety, that I was feeling was what gave me the drive to make it happen. I'm quite an extreme person. I tend to push things, and I think actually it was partly that the door opened, but partly that I have that kind of whirring anxiety inside me, and I just had that drive to go, I'm going to make this happen. So obviously it took a lot of work and a lot of effort to be where we are now, but that was part of the sort of motivation and the drive for it, I think.
Yeah, and I guess with your friends saying to you, hey, we've got this opportunity, why don't you come out and do it? And also the fact that you've been over there several times as well, had that kind of built confidence even before you got there that you could go out there and make a life in the wilderness?
Yeah, definitely, that was key. It wouldn't have been possible for us to take the route of just going and buying a property in the wilderness and just living here. We did not have the skills. It's a completely different skill set to what I had in Britain, and what you would have if you lived in most urban areas and most rural areas. Let's face it, this is a very different ball game, and so you do have to learn how to do things and how to cope out here. Like very basic things, like if you can't use a chainsaw and cut down trees and cut your wood, you were going to freeze to death. So no one's going to deliver the wood for you. You've got to do it. So there are really basic things that you have to have in place before you can move here. And I think it was having the opportunity to live with people who already had those skills and learn from them that opened the gateway for me to feeling that it was possible.
Yeah, there's not much use for a chainsaw in London, is there, really, when you think about it?
No, I think you'd find yourself fairly swiftly arrested if you, unless you were a qualified tree surgeon, you'd be in trouble there.
So before you get on that plane then to head out to Alaska, leaving your UK life behind, what did family and friends think? Was there support there? Was there confusion, pure worry? What was going on with the people closest to you?
It was a total mix. It was a complete mix. I think in my family, I have a very small family, and they're quite elderly now, and there was a lot of fear, and I think probably some anger that I was going. And as I said, my family are elderly, so it was a selfish move, and I have to deal with that fact, and we speak when we can. But as they're getting older now, that me being on the other side of the world isn't the best best thing, so it was a selfish move on my part. Amongst my friends, I think on the other hand, they were also pleased I was so excited, and they were excited for me. And I think amongst my friends and people that I knew, it was a complete mix of some people just saying, oh my God, I always wanted to live in a cabin in the wilderness. Oh my God, you're living my dream. And other people who just thought it was weird, and they thought I was weird for doing it, and they didn't really want to talk about it. They were like, oh, so it was I got a complete mixed response. But a lot of people, yes, were very supportive. But and other people actually told me sort of more or less not to go. So it was a complete mix.
The people that were telling you not to go, had they been out there, or were they just kind of voicing their fears for something that they kind of knew nothing about?
Yeah, it was that. I don't know anyone else who's been to Alaska. A couple of people actually I do know, but no, it wasn't people who'd been here or people who understood the life. I think it was either based on a fear for me because they were very close friends, or and it wasn't very many people that were like that, but I did come across it. I think there's also an element which other listeners might experience if they've sort of done something different. I know this sounds really horrible, but there are some people out there who don't want you living your dream if they're not living theirs.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really horrible thing to say, but I think we've all probably kind of encountered that. It's if you get a good job or something, most people will be really pleased for you, but there might be a couple of people who are a bit snide, and you just need to stay away from those people. Simple as that. It wasn't my good friends, but you just people are bound to feel like that. And actually, it was more men than women, which was interesting. And I think because this kind of lifestyle is often seen as a male lifestyle or sort of male dominated activities, I wonder, I don't know, it's pure conjecture, but I wonder if there was a little thing with some men who perhaps see themselves as being a bit macho. It was like, oh, what's she doing? Living the kind of thing that I wanted to do, I don't know. So but for the most part, actually, it was positive. So I don't want to dwell too much on the few people that weren't wholly supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. And in previous podcasts we've kind of focused on people who are the cheerleaders around you, who were the people that were responsive to what you wanted to do and supportive and, providing you with the confidence. So it sounds like you have quite a mixed bag, but on the whole, quite positive.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of pack down your life in the UK? Was there a lot that you had to do practically before you got on the plane over to Alaska?
Yeah, it was quite the thing. So we decided obviously we're going to rent out our property in London because that would give us enough money to exist on over here. So there was sort of sorting all that out. We'd never done that before, so that was a kind of a thing, dealing with the estate agents, and then all our stuff. And I think initially in the first year we sort of tried to ship as much as we could. We left everything in the house furniture wise for the tenants, so that was fine. And then we tried to sort of leave stuff with family and friends where we could. That actually changed. Once we realised we were staying, we had to get rid of all that. But what I remember, my most sort of poignant memory, is the van from a local charity shop. I don't remember which one, but they did pickups. So basically just arriving and taking nearly all of our stuff away. We just had to give it away because things that you do, like I don't like it. You don't throw stationery away, do you? You keep it in case you need it. You want to print something out. But if you're leaving the country, you're never going to use that stationery. My husband, for some reason, had accumulated loads of socks and pants. And I was like, Neil, there's 3 drawers of socks and pants. We're not giving these to my mum or a friend. They're going to the charity shop. But just to make things really complicated, we decided to get married in the months before we left, which then threw another complete spanner in the works. But we were engaged. It's just we kind of moved quite slowly. We're moving quite slowly towards that point of marriage. But actually, someone pointed out to me and said, "Look, if you guys go to Alaska, you're just disappearing off there, and you're not related to each other in any way legally." You need to do this now. So in the last minute, we tried to throw together a wedding, which just made everything more difficult than it needed to be. But a very small wedding, we didn't try and plan a big wedding or a church wedding, obviously. But so it was that was before we left, sort of initially to come and stay with our friends out there in the bush. Yeah, it was quite a hectic time.
Wow, a wedding and moving to the other side of the world in that short space.
Yeah.
Well done. What an achievement. Wow. So what about the practicalities? Do you have to have visas and stuff for going to live over there, or was it different because you were actually going over to work? What was the situation?
So I'll have to kind of fast forward the story quite a bit to get to the visa point. But when we went to Alaska, we just went. So the truthful answer is yes, you do. We weren't actually working. We weren't being paid in any respect by these people. So we just went to America. But we're now in Canada, and sort of part of our journey, which has got multiple steps in between this, was when we knew we actually wanted to live here as opposed to coming here for a year. When I say here, I mean, in the bush. We made the decision that we wanted to come into Canada, and we wanted to do everything properly and officially. And so yes, you do need a visa to be in Canada. For you can get a 6-month tourist visa if you just want to come on holiday, and as long as you're not working or doing anything you shouldn't be, you can extend that. So when we were first looking at moving over here, they very kindly extended that for us so we could stay a bit longer. So but if you want to live in Canada, you have to have a visa, and obviously if you want to live in Alaska, you have to have that US green card, which is extremely difficult to get.
Yeah, so you mentioned the stepping stones then between Alaska and the Yukon, where you are living now in the bush. So it'd be great to go through in terms of, obviously, I've just got this picture of, you and Neil getting on the plane. Neil's pants and socks are now well behind somewhere in a London charity shop. And, you're getting up with no stationery. So you land in Alaska. And so what's the first few weeks like when you arrive? Was it an assault on the senses, or did you feel quite comfortable with it because you've been out there before and you knew what to expect?
When we first arrived, so when we were living with the couple there in Alaska, I had been there before, and I'd been going there for some years then. So we were sort of 12 years after the time I'd first traveled to Alaska, so I had got used to some of it. As I said, it was still kind of crazy and mad and exciting and wonderful, but I was a little bit used to some of it. For Neil, it was, I think, just a complete head fuck, if I'm honest with you. I mean, he was enjoying it, but he was totally out of his depths. So yeah, there was a lot that, as I said, everything was different from the way, even like shopping, in Britain, I was used to going down the shops most days for something or another, and then maybe doing a big shop once a week. Like here, you do a big shop once a year. That's it. You've got to get everything then, it's, so we had to do our big shop before we came in. We met these people in Fairbanks, and they sort of drove us to the big store. And so it's, it was quite overwhelming when we first arrived.
And tell us a bit about Neil, like, you've had the childhood dream, and you've gone out and back, and he's gone out there and come back, and you've both gone out there together. How did he end up leaving his job that he had with Sky then? Did you have to convince him quite a bit, or how did that work? Because I've had experience with Amy. I guess we both have, in terms of I'll have a crazy idea and I'll approach her and I'll tell her all the reasons why we should do this, and then she just goes along with it, I think, most of the time. And then she decides that she says, hey, I've got this idea, why don't we give up renting the flat, we can live in a static caravan on my mum's farm. And I'm like, hell no, we're not doing that. And then a few months later we're living in a static caravan. So the kind of experience in terms of let's call it partner negotiation. How did that work with Neil?
When we first got the offer, obviously I said we just need some time to think about it. So I said to him, look, we've got this offer. What do you want to do? It's an amazing opportunity. He said, okay, I want to think about it. And then, being Neil, he just thought about it. It was like 6 months later. I'm like, okay, are you still thinking about it? Are we going or not? And then like 9 months later, okay, are you thinking about it? And in the end, I sort of nailed him, and I said, look, what do you want to do? And he said, I don't want to go. And I said to him, you're a fucking moron. I just told him straight, you are a fucking, we will never get this chance in our lives again. This is a life-changing opportunity, and you're not going to go because what? You know what I mean? So that was the kind of starting point of our negotiation, shall we call it, about it. But I think that the thing was, I knew he was getting fed up with his job. Like, he'd worked for himself all his life. He'd always run his own business, and then it went to the wall, as I mentioned before, and he was then in a salary job, which was amazing. But he was cycling on a bike 2 hours each way. So 4 hours of commuting every day. I mean, he chose to cycle, obviously, but it was actually quicker than going by train, because the Sky place is quite a way out of London. And he wasn't used to not being his own boss. So he'd got so much from it, but I know he was starting to get really frustrated and he was starting to whinge. And he was saying to me, he'd already said, I don't want to stay in this role. You know, I might try and move to another organization or whatever. So I'm like, look, you're telling me you're going to change your job. Why don't we just do this now? And what actually changed it, I think, was when I called him a fucking moron, it woke him up a bit. But was he what he told me, which I didn't know, was that when his father was young, his father had the opportunity to go and live in Patagonia and had turned it down and regretted it for the rest of his life, and had told Neil about this. And I think Neil suddenly had this kind of light bulb moment of like, oh my God, this won't come round again, and if I might regret this forever. And the stakes were low. You know, we had by that point, we'd left the council flat, you know, it was sort of many years after that. And we actually had a house in London, a little house. It's like, we can rent this out. You know, we're not going to go under while we're away. We have got nothing to lose. If you're going to leave your job anyway and move on. My acting work, you know, it's all just like, you know, one job this week, another job the next. You don't plan it, so I could just go. That was no big deal. I was like, what on earth? We've got no kids. Why aren't we doing this? You know?
Yeah. I guess with the house in London, then you've almost got a bit of a safety net, haven't you? And then career-wise, you've also got a safety net because you're both experienced in what you do, and you can always go back and jump into something else if you wanted to. So was that a big part of the decision making in the end, then, the fact that you knew you had a bit of safety and security?
In terms of career, I didn't have any. I mean, acting is the most insecure career ever, and I had never had any. I didn't know that I would earn money from one week to the next. So the point was actually I was used to having no safety net. So that didn't bother me at all. With Neil, he spent a long time unemployed. So he didn't, you know, there was no guarantee he would get back into work. But, you know, I was used to living with that insecurity. Actually, he wasn't. And I kind of made him, I just said, well, we're going to live with it. In terms of the financial security with the house, that made a difference, and it didn't, in the sense that I had a council flat. So this is like gold dust. This doesn't happen anymore. But I had that for not when I first moved to London, but I got one, I think, in my mid-20s. And so they're not going to kick you off. So all I would need to do would be to rent it to a friend. So probably that had always been a factor in my willingness to just spend money, or, you know, to spend everything I had coming in on going to Alaska. Do you know what I'm saying? So the housing security wasn't new to me, but I would agree with you that having some kind of security in your home, whether that's a housing association flat or your own house or whatever, is helpful. However, you know, going back to, you know, before the council flat, when I was paying 50 quid a week to live in a tiny room in a house in Brixton, I could just walk away from that. You know, everything I owned fitted into my Vauxhall Nova, and there was a freedom in that too. So I suppose what I'm thinking about for listeners who might be in different situations is to say there's very often a way. It's about how you look at it rather than, you know, what it actually is, unless you'll say like up to your ears in debt. And you know what I mean? There might be times when you really shouldn't just go off and abandon things, but very often you can walk away easier than you think.
Yeah, I guess there's always lots of reasons to do something, but then, you know, depending on your mindset, there could be a lot of reasons not to do it. But so I guess, you know, what I'm hearing, you know, with you and with Neil in the end is that you kind of both were like, well, you know, what have we got to lose? Let's go and do it. You know, you can always come back if it doesn't work out. So just moving on then from, when you got to Alaska initially, what was the pathway then for you to end up in the Yukon bush? What, you know, how did you get there? What was the journey?
Yeah. Well, so again, that was a long journey, which I'll try not to give you too much detail about. But what happened was we kind of realised we wanted to be in the bush, and we wanted to try and really make a go of it. We didn't at any point go, right, we are going to live in the bush. Not at this stage. We were like, we want to give it another year. We want to try it, keep trying, if you know what I mean. We were very unplanned in the way that we did it. But we did realise that living in America with no visas and all that, it was a road to nowhere, really, you know. So we had through sort of that experience met a couple who lived in the wilderness in Canada on the Yukon River, and they needed dog sitters. It was that random. So we were like, okay, great. Well, we'll come to you this winter. And you know, again, they were way out in the bush, so they weren't running a tour operation or anything. Their business was sort of different to that. But when we kind of looked after their dogs, and then through that there was a abandoned. No, it wasn't an abandoned cabin. We thought it was abandoned. There was a cabin a few miles away from them, just way out, totally overgrown in the bush. And they were like, "Oh, you could go and live there. No one's there anymore." And so then we moved there in February at -50 Celsius. And got there to discover that there were gaps between the log walls so big. I was just stuffing them with newspaper to keep the cold out. So it was kind of wonderful and sort of miserable all at the same time. It was like, I can remember we slept in the bed with like literally our friend had lent us all this stuff, like, because we had nothing. Remember, we came with 2 suitcases. We didn't have a van load of stuff or anything, so we didn't have sleeping bags or anything. I think by then someone had given us parkas, and we used to sleep with everything sort of piled on the bed. Like, it was so cold, I actually burnt my hands on the cutlery in the morning going down to make a cup of coffee in this cabin. The cutlery had got down to -50, and I picked up a spoon and burnt my hand. Just like that. That's how cold it was. So, like, obviously we weren't going to stay there, and let alone we were actually squatting. It turns out that people did own the cabin and they didn't want us there, so we had to move on from there. And then it's all just a random chain. We met a gold miner not far from there, and he wanted someone to look after the equipment on his mine over the winter whilst he was away, because they only mine in the summer here because it's too cold in the winter. The gold's frozen, the ground is frozen, and he had a little cabin on the land, so we spent a winter in that little cabin, just sort of on his mine in the middle of nowhere again, just, kind of completely cut off. And we were actually going to carry on with that because that worked with him, and with our tourist visa of 6 months, that kind of worked. So our plan then became, we'll go back to Britain in the summers, work as hard as we can, live somewhere really cheap, keep the house rented out, so we're getting a rental income from that, and then go back in the winters and live in this little gold mine and just kind of be there. And that, that'll be amazing. But then the second winter we were going to do that, it turns out his situation changed. The gold miner's situation changed, and he was going to need to be in that cabin. So there was nowhere for us to go. And so what happened, and this must have been about 2015, was we were in a flat in Woolwich in a tower block. I remember this little council flat. And we were like, I got the email that we couldn't go back to the gold mine. We had nowhere to stay there. And I was just like, that's it. We've hit the end of the road now. This is the end of all our leads. We've got nowhere to go, to go back to. We're not going to make it happen. And at that point, we were homeless in Britain, not destitute at all because we had rental income coming in, but we were homeless. Neil had no work. I had no work. We were staying on friends' floors, literally from Cornwall to Manchester. We ended up in this council flat in Woolwich. And we were, and it was a really horrible position. It's like, we've got nowhere to go back to in the bush where we want to live. We've got nowhere to live here. Our house is rented out on contract for the rest of the year. We can't even move back in legally if we want to. We're stuck in this tiny little flat that we've managed to get into. And, it was a really horrible time. And I remembered that of someone we've met here, the people we dog sat for, had told us that there was a property for sale right on the Yukon River. But it was too expensive. There was no way we could afford it. So I'd just kind of forgotten about it. And I just kind of remembered it. And I knew it had been on the market for a long time. No one wanted to buy it because it was too remote. And it was overpriced. And I thought, well, why don't we just like make a really low offer and see if she accepts it, because she's been trying to sell it for a couple of years, this person, we didn't know them. And for some reason I looked at the two things happened. One was my husband landed an amazing short contract with Rolls-Royce, paying like an enormous amount of money. So that kind of changed our mentality immediately. We're like, excellent. Or not enormous amount, but in our terms, enormous. Sorry, obviously it wasn't like, hundreds of thousands or anything. It was a lot of money. And I looked at the Canadian exchange rate, and incredibly, it had gone to $2 to the pound, which has never happened since. I don't remember what was going on economically, but I was like, whatever we pay for this property, we're getting it half price. We just need to do this. And I had a relative who was willing to lend us some money. And so it's like the kind of stars aligned. I got in touch with this person and just made a really low offer on the property. And she said yes. And it's like, okay, that's it. We're just going to buy it. And we hadn't seen it. We'd driven along the Yukon River on a snow machine one winter, and we'd passed it. So I sort of vaguely knew where it was, and I'd seen that there was a cabin there, but we hadn't come up onto the land. We hadn't been in the house or anything. It was the only place for sale. I mean, I suppose one thing to explain to listeners is there's very, very little land for sale around here on the Yukon, all through, Canada and Alaska. It's either national park or First Nation land or Native Corporation land, or what's known as Queensland here in Canada, which is sort of government-owned land. Like there are very few privately titled properties, like literally a handful. So it was an incredibly rare opportunity. And that's it. And so that's what kind of, it was sort of desperation really that brought us here, with just some stars aligning, the currency rate just suddenly going mad, and Neil just suddenly, from completely unemployed sitting around and actually being very fractious and very upset. It was a really awful summer. We were arguing with each other. We had no money. We didn't know what to do. To just everything kind of changed in the space of 2 days. It was sort of incredible, as it can sometimes. And so, the woman accepted our offer. And I can remember we had to use a lawyer in Whitehorse, the Yukon capital, to, buy the property. And the lawyers were like, oh, there could be asbestos here. No one's looked at it. We don't know how habitable the buildings are. And we were just like, we don't care. We've got a tent. We just need somewhere to live. It does not matter. Like, I couldn't explain. It's like, I don't care about asbestos or this or that. Just get the contract sorted, please. So that's how it kind of happened. So it's like, I know for anyone listening, it's a hard thing to replicate, because there were a lot of factors that just happened that were random. But I suppose the thing that you can replicate is, if you want something, if you become clear about what it is that you want in this world, often if you just keep going at it, you just get little breaks, and it happens. I think the trick is to just stay focused on it.
Yeah, that's quite evident from talking to you, in terms of, you've got this vision, and even though, all these barriers and hurdles turned up, and, life took a kind of wrong turn when you came back to the UK, you've ended up living the dream life that you wanted to live. So the property that you're in now, is that's the one that you're talking about? That's the one that you bought that you'd never even been into?
That's right. Yeah, that's where I am now. Yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. So can you give people a bit of an idea of the remoteness of it, really? So, like, where are your nearest neighbours? How do you get there? How do you travel around? Where's your nearest shop, hospital, practicality?
Yeah. Sure. So we're right on the banks of the Yukon River. Our nearest people are so there's no road into here, so we can only travel on the river. There's no like track or anything out through the woods, so the river is our only mode of transport. And it 2 times of the year for a number of weeks or months we can't travel, because when the river's either freezing or, as it is in the process of doing at the minute, breaking up. So those shoulder seasons between summer and winter, it's not safe to go by snow machine, and obviously you can't get a boat in. So we're actually cut off for somewhere between like 2 and 3 months of the year, so quite a long time in total. And our nearest neighbours are actually, there's a couple who live about 20 miles downstream from us. So they would be the nearest people. And then the nearest town is Dawson City, which is, I say city, there's like, by British standards, we're talking a very small village. It's like 2,000 people there, but it is actually a city. And that's, if you go upstream to Dawson, it's 40 miles upstream. We can't always go that way, because sometimes the ice in the winter is too rough. So often we have to go down to where the other people are, and there's a kind of mining track there which joins what is a road in the summer, and that's like, so that's an 80-mile route which we often have to take to get into town. And in town, so there's nothing here. There's no little tea shop, no pub, no takeaways, like nothing, no Deliveroo, none of the stuff you want, none of it here. And there's nothing where the other couple live. So the nearest place is Dawson, which, it has some really great pubs actually, and there's a general store there and a hardware store. and there's a hospital there, a small hospital, which is useful. But for a lot of stuff you have to go to the Yukon capital, which is Whitehorse, which is a sort of, a city by sort of a small city by British standards. And that's where you could get like dentists and to superstores and mechanics and all that other kind of things that you might, or buy big pieces of equipment, that kind of thing. And that is, I think it's 300 miles by road from here. I think I've got that right. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. That's we don't have facilities nearby, unfortunately.
Yeah. But that's part of the allure for you, is it, that living in the bush and the remoteness of it all? Is that something you enjoy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be a wilderness if we had facilities nearby. You have small bush communities here, and we're quite unusual in that we live right out on our own. There are other people that do live out on their own, obviously, but you have like flying communities, like say Old Crow is a little flying village that's in the Yukon to the north of here, but that's a village, and you can't drive in, but it's an actual village with facilities. We're just sort of here by ourselves. Yeah, and obviously, yes, that is the allure, is to be completely out by yourselves. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the kind of practicalities for like heating, lighting, water and internet. What do you do for those things?
Well, I guess the first one to explain is the internet, because obviously that's the one I'm using right now. So we've got a satellite internet connection. So we've got a big dish it's out on the bank there that hits the satellite. And it's not a great internet connection, but equally it's not terrible. Sometimes it's worse than others, but as you can hear, we're sort of chatting away on Skype here, so that's good. And that's been a bit of a lifesaver, really. So I think when we first moved here, I had this sort of idea that it didn't matter about the internet, and in fact we didn't. We had it when we were with the couple in Alaska, but when we first moved here, we didn't have it. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, I don't need it. Actually, I think that would get a bit old after a few years, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? And once these sort of amazing excitement of being in the wilderness wears off, it's like, actually, you do want to know that your family are all right. You do need to do banking. I've just spent the past week trying to get my taxes into the CRA. Those things don't go away because you move to the bush. I now have to do taxes in Britain and Canada, which is like just great fun, as you can imagine. So that part of life, it doesn't go away. So it's good to be able to deal with it. And the other great thing is that my husband has set up a business, a remote working consultancy, which has been fantastic. So the internet has been an amazing enabler for us and everyone apart from one person I know in the bush has it. So it is actually a part of modern bush life in a way that maybe two-way radio would have been before, So we've got that. And in terms of fuel, basically we have wood and we have gas, petrol. Those are our two forms of fuel. So the cabin is heated with, we've got a what we call a barrel stove. So it's they're quite common here. It's like a 50-gallon oil drum that's converted into a wood stove. So that's our main form of heating in the winter. And there's a flat plate welded in the top. So we cook on that in the winter as well. And then as well as that, we've got this gorgeous, I wish I could show you actually, Ali, like this incredible like 1970s wood cooking range, which is what we cook on in the summer or in the shoulder season. And it's just like this beautiful old sort of range, all with, well, very faded now chrome, and it has a little wood box. So again, that's a wood generated thing. And then for power, we don't use much. We run a little generator, a Honda 1000, and we run that most days for maybe an hour or two to power the modem for the internet. And then while we're running that, we just charge our computers and Kindles and whatever else, headlamps, which we need a lot here. We charge them while it's running. But we're north facing and we're in a kind of steep valley. We've got mountains behind us. So at the minute, the way the technology is with solar, and the expense of it here, it's not worth us trying to convert to solar yet. We sort of did the maths of it. The thing is, we're living in the far north, is you can't get stuff cheaply. So like friends in Britain are like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? It's like, yeah, you can get that in Britain. We can't get deliveries from Amazon a lot of the time and eBay a lot of the time. We don't have access to it. So I'm waiting for hopefully the technology will step up enough that we can, have like less light and still power things. But at the minute, it's financially not viable. So for lighting, if we have 24-hour daylight almost now, so we don't need any lighting at all in the summer. We're nearly at that point now. We're not there yet. In the winter, on the opposite, we get like 5 hours of daylight during the day, so you do need a lot of lighting. And it's a kind of twilight. The sun doesn't come up here between like October and March, sort of mid-October, mid-March. We don't get the sun. You do get a kind of twilight here, but it is literally pitch black at 11 in the morning and pitch black at 5 in the evening, if not sort of 4. It's dark here. So we use kerosene lanterns actually and headlamps. Which are rechargeable, so we're not. So at first we had batteries, and my God, you whip through them. So now we've got rechargeable, and that's what we use for lighting. And around where the kitchen area and where we work on the computers, we did this year buy like little cheap strips on eBay of LED lighting. And in the winter, when we take the battery out of the boat, we bring it in and then we run the LEDs off that battery, just in the kind of work areas, because it's not a particularly pleasant light, but you kind of need it a little bit. So that's our lighting. What was it? Heating, lighting, and I think, did you ask about water? I think that's the other kind of
water as well.
Staple. Yeah, so we've got no plumbing here at all. We literally just get buckets of water from the creek. And in the winter, we put them in the sled and so by the snow machine. You've got to keep it all inside because obviously it freezes outside. So we've always got a stack of buckets of water in here. And in the summer, we have to carry it up by hand. But last year, we did actually invest in a very cheap water pump from the creek, because we tried to grow a little garden and it was just doing our backs in carrying all the water. So we bought little cheap water pumps so we could pump water up, and then literally it rained all summer. After the day, we managed to collect the water from the post office, and so we haven't used it, but we might need it this summer. So yeah, everything is from buckets of water, and we filter the water here that we drink, because I've had giardiosis many times. The water here is not, although people might go, oh, it's pure, it's clear. Yeah, it looks pure and clear, but it is raging with beaver fever, or giardiosis. So I've been sick on it so many times. I know, just filter everything.
Yeah. So you've been there how many years now? Is it 9?
We moved to Alaska in the summer of 2012. So that was when the sort of journey itself started. And we moved into this property itself in 2016. So what's that, like 5 years?
Yeah, and I think you said earlier on that it kind of feels like home now. Do you feel like you are kind of part of the community, and do you feel like a sense of belonging where you are now?
Yes, I mean, in terms of community, we're on our own. So there is a community. There's a bush community of the people that live on the river, and we are most definitely part of that. But like as I said, the nearest people are 20 miles away, and then we've got friends after that are 50 miles. They're sort of 30 miles beyond them, and then we've still got friends down in Alaska on the other side of the border. So it's a very stretched out community. What's been really nice is over the past few years, as we've got better snow machines and more adept at traveling and found places to stay in Dawson. We've spent a bit more time in Dawson City, and we've got to know people there, which has been really nice. So we're beginning to feel part of that community as well. But I think up until the past sort of year or so, the only people we met were people that came out to the bush, which is like, they're the most amazing people and wonderful people to meet. But I was sort of missing out a bit on the community of getting to know people in Dawson. But sort of slowly we're getting to know people.
Oh, that's good to hear. I think we are quite sociable creatures as humans, aren't we? And whilst we might not like our solitude, it is also nice to meet new people and make new relationships. Just in terms of like living in the Yukon, living in the bush, you mentioned earlier about the skill sets required and knowing how to use the chainsaw properly, and just kind of giving people I'm sure people realise what Alaska's like, what the Yukon is like from perhaps things they've seen on the TV, and it's described as wild, mountainous, sparsely populated. But what challenges has that brought to your front door in terms of the skill sets you need, the safety concerns, the solitude, wild animals? What kind of things do you have to deal with day to day that might be seen as huge challenges over here?
Yeah, I mean, God, where to start with that, actually? A lot. And sometimes certainly when we first lived here, it felt like every day was just sort of like a rolling mass of danger and challenge. You know what I mean? Obviously, we got better. But I mean, the issue is that here we are not, although I said there is a hospital in 40 miles away in Dawson, we can't get there in an emergency. You know, sometimes it takes us 9 hours to get to Dawson. Sometimes we can't get there at all. So it would require being medevac by helicopter. So essentially, if, say, we had an accident with a chainsaw, I think the chances of us surviving would be very, very, it would be very small. So we try to be very, very careful with what we're doing, because we know that by the time you'd got the internet on, tried to get hold of someone, tried to get a helicopter here, get picked up, you may not survive that. So we're very, very careful. But most of the things we need to do are dangerous. Obviously not all of them, but a lot of them are just dangerous. You're dealing with fire all the time. All like every day you're dealing with, even the summer, to make a fire to cook on. You're dealing with gasoline all of the time. You're always filling the boat, filling the snow machines, whatever. We're chainsawing most days, particularly if we're building something. So, you've got the inherent danger of this tool, with this piece of equipment that is lethal. You've got the danger of working with, like, we built a workshop, working with logs which are heavy, which fall, which can kill you, and of course the danger of felling the trees from which we get the logs. You've got to cut them down. They fall down with a slam. They don't always go in the direction that you wanted them to. So I think around tree felling, chainsaws, logs is our sort of main danger. And also, there are dangerous animals here. We're always, in the summer, we're always aware of bears. We always carry bear spray, even at the edge of the yard, because they come right up into the yard. And if we're going up in the hills where there's grizzlies, we usually carry a rifle. So you have to be aware. I mean, they come really close. I remember one summer, I think it was a couple of years ago, I was putting the water filter away for the night, draining it by the window, and I look up and there's a bear right at the window, and it's got its paws around the back porch, and it's actually leaning against the back porch, scratching its back, like, so I can just see the back of it, and it's kind of doing this like Jungle Book kind of thing on the back of the porch to get an itch in its back. I mean, literally 5 feet from where I'm standing. Wow. So it's very wild. The animals out there don't know that this is our property until they sort of come right up. But a lot of the animals here aren't, used to humans, if you know what I mean. But essentially, this is just another piece of wilderness. Like, we had wolves bring down a caribou just at the edge of the yard. It was pitch black in the winter. We didn't know what the hell it was. We were terrified because we just couldn't work out what all this snarling and noise was. And it was a pack of wolves, like, right at the edge of the yard, attacking a caribou. Like, it really is wild here. I mean, there's no actual danger from wolves, but there certainly is from bears. And I think, like, in terms of skills, there's a lot to learn, and we're learning it all from scratch. So there's obviously chainsawing, which is the most dangerous. We're dealing with guns. We hunt here. So there's bear defense, the bear defense element of guns, and there's also actual hunting. So that's a very dangerous thing, just handling the guns and also dealing with a wild animal that you might have shot. People get hurt very often in hunting situations, so that's another situation with, like, high risk for us. And I think the main risk as well comes from being on the snow machines in winter and putting trail in, because where we are, we have to put our trail in on the Yukon River. So what I mean by that is when it freezes, the ice kind of freezes in the autumn, and then it tends to jumble up quite often. It doesn't just freeze flat. The ice kind of sort of gets mashed together. So you've got a very rough kind of environment out there. You don't just drive out on it. Quite often you have to go out there with a big maul axe and beat it down and try and get the machine over it and beat in trails. And sometimes you have to use a chainsaw to cut the ice out. It can be very rough. Another place it's it can be flat and you can just drive, but there's always the inherent risk that you're going to go through the river. And it does happen to people, and it happened to us, but we were luckily in a shallow spot. So, obviously you make the best judgment you can about where's safe to go, and we test it with an axe before we go over it, try and check it's like 5 inches thick before we drive on it. But, that is an inherently dangerous thing to do, and people do go through the ice and people do die. So, there's a lot of risk here. So part of the skill is, the important skill for us is learning to read the ice and read the river, and sort of trying to make a safe assessment of what's going on out there before we try and drive onto it.
I guess in a nutshell, day to day, the pair of you are looking out for each other and making sure that you stay alive while still living a really enjoyable life out there in the bush. And you've kind of answered our questions and kind of given us the answers that we kind of expected to hear in terms of the necessity to hunt, the necessity to cut the trails and be really aware of your surroundings and have the skill set to deal with that safely, and not just be kind of a gung-ho approach. It sounds like you're really taking a measured approach, and I know you've been there for some time, but it still sounds like you're really respectful of the environment and keeping each other safe.
It's a really important, it's a really interesting point to me that I was much more gung-ho before I moved here. Like, I would just kind of, I love to like ride my bike down really steep slopes and ski down, like anything that I thought was going to be a bit challenging, give it a go, like drive the dog sled, at full speed. Since I've lived here, like we've got the ramp down to the river, and occasionally I'll go out on skis. Not often, it's not really a great environment for it, but like occasionally I'll get the skis out and I will walk down that ramp, which before I would have taken great joy in like hurtling down, but I'm not going to risk breaking my ankle down. It's actually made me much more safety conscious. And there was one thing that you mentioned, actually, I've remembered in the question where you talked about solitude, and what the challenge was around that. And I didn't touch on that point, and I'd just like to really briefly, because luckily there is two of us here most of the time, not all of the time. Often one of us is by ourselves, but the other person is kind of there. But occasionally, yes, it is lonely, and I think you're right when you said we are social creatures. So it's been important to us to sort of maintain links with the other people on the river, and also to get to know people in town. But the other thing, of course, is social media, which I know it can be a curse, and it's a sort of double-edged sword, social media, but it's how I came in touch with you, two marvelous women there, so that has actually been a great thing for us to just be able to go on to social media and to email friends, and something that kind of wouldn't have had in the old days, and that's kind of brought us sort of a new element, I think, to living in the bush over the last few years, which has just been fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned social media, because obviously that's something we always kind of wrap up on in terms of where can people follow you, and there's still more questions that I want to ask you, so don't feel like I'm trying to cut the interview now. I think we could probably talk to you for another hour, and maybe we'll come back to you at another time, because the story's fascinating. But yeah, we came across you on Instagram, and I can't remember how. I don't know, maybe it was recommended, like sometimes it does weirdly on your news feeds, and some of the pictures that you're posting on there about the Yukon, it's like, wow, this is really bloody cool. And I think part of us loves to live other people's lifestyles vicariously, don't we? It's like, wow, that looks so amazing, that looks so cool. And then, like, talking to you tonight, you hear the reality of what it really means to live a lifestyle in the bush. So you have these amazing pictures, but behind that, there are so many challenges and things that you need to think about if you do want to go and live that life out there. But I just want to mention, actually, or ask, you posted a picture recently of a cake. Was that your 50th birthday cake?
No, it was our wedding anniversary cake. That's one of the things that I don't cook at all, but Neil likes to cook, and he likes to bake, and we have no oven here. The cooking range that we have, the oven's kind of a bit rusted out, so anything we try and bake is always this ridiculous process of trial and error, and things either being undercooked or burnt, or usually a combination of the both. And that was one of the that was one of the best most picturesque attempts, I think, if anybody saw that.
Yeah. And your Instagram handle, is it Yukon Bush Life?
Yeah, Yukon Bush Life, all one word. We're on Instagram and Facebook. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I love the picture of the cake, because, in between all these amazing pictures of the wilderness, and you've been talking recently about the breakup of the river and how dicey that might be and stuff. And then there's this really real picture of this cake. I'm not going to spoil the image, but, go on there and have a look, because what I love, and Amy is the same, we love real Instagram feeds. We the people that we follow and people's lives that we follow, it's like they share the reality of things, and I think the cake is a really good reality that people should go and have a look at. But yeah, just
thank you.
to what do you think in terms of life in the Yukon, what do you think, if you could name just one, what would the biggest challenge be that you've overcome so far?
That's a really hard question to answer, because there were so many, and if I'm to be honest, actually, I won't go into this. It's actually dealing with bureaucracy and government, and it's absolutely impossible out here. Like my greatest challenge, number one, is the two-step telephone authentication system that everywhere has adopted, with the idea that there's nobody in the world anymore without a telephone. Well, we don't have a telephone. We've only got Skype. So yeah, banking, tax, everything. This is actually one of my great PayPal. None of this works for me anymore. So that's actually like a major challenge, but not the most interesting. I think to not go into one particular incident, but the greatest challenge is actually that you can't ever turn it off. Like times in London when I do like really hard day at this or that, and I just think, oh fuck it, I'm just going to get a takeaway now and bottle of wine, and I'm going to sit and watch telly, and that's it. It's that kind of, I'm just going to get the bus home feeling. We can never just get the bus home. We can never even just call a cab. We can do a 9-hour journey back from Dawson at 30, 40 below, and then we get here. The house is completely frozen down solid. We've got to get a fire going. We've then got to go down to the creek, bust out a water hole, because we've frozen over. We try and keep it open, but it'll froze. Got to bust out ice in the creek, fill buckets of water, bring them back. It's like there's no point of, even when we're home, just going, oh, we'll just get a takeaway and relax tonight. And there are times, I think, when I've wanted to just turn it off, and I think that's been a challenge. Probably very similar to having a small child, in fact, thinking of Ollie here. I'm sure there must be times when you just wish you could turn him off, put him in the cupboard.
Send him back.
So it's not me. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you found ways around it, and it is just that thing of you just have to, you can have a little, at the beginning often we'd have like little tantrums about it, like one of us would be like shouting or crying, like, no, I don't want to, and then there's nothing, you just stop shouting or crying, and then you have to do it because you can't, there's no one listening, there's not going to change, you can't phone anyone, you can't, you just have to then get on and do it. So I think that's something we've got better at as time has gone on.
And just on the flip side of that, and what I'm hearing from the start of this conversation is so many challenges that you've single-handedly and as a couple embraced and kicked ass with as well. But what's the best thing about the move that you think you've made?
It's the freedom, and it is the challenge. Actually, it's incredibly exciting and it's incredibly freeing. And what's kind of great is life here is often very, very peaceful, and that is just wonderful. And it's kind of this incredible mix of being tremendously exciting and a real buzz, like total buzz, but then just being very, very peaceful at the same time. And I think that's the kind of, it's a really hard environment. So it's the inherent challenge that comes with living in the subarctic wilderness, the challenge and the buzz of that, as well as the peace of having kind of total freedom, really within the small range of what we can do and what's possible here. We're free to do what we want, more or less. I mean, obviously there are rules about poaching and all that kind of thing, I'm not saying that, but in terms of what we want to do, it's just our time's our own and we're free, and that's an amazing thing, an amazing gift.
Brilliant. And is there anything at all you miss about life in the UK?
Well, obviously friends and family. So I mean, most people who emigrate miss that. But things like pubs, Indian food. I miss the funny thing is, actually, the things that I miss, I sort of don't want to say, because people in Britain are just going to be like gnashing their teeth, because it's the things that no one has at the minute. It's the buzz of being out in the city. It's the buzz of being in town on a Saturday night, going to pubs and going to restaurants. Indian particularly, I miss. There don't seem to be any at all anywhere. But because of this is a fascinating thing, is like, because of the coronavirus, no one has at the minute. So at least we have this. So it feels very churlish to be missing things that even people who live in urban Britain don't have at the minute, So, but those are the things I miss.
And one thing that we always ask people that we interview is what they would say to other women who are thinking of making a bold change in life to escape the norm. So what would you say to any listeners who are maybe toying with the idea of, well, maybe living a life similar to you, or something completely different, what would you say to them?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on.
Well, I mean, for any
answer.
Yeah.
Before you answer, you can't tell them that they're an effing moron and they should just do it.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what to say now. Then we'll just skip to the end, shall we? No, I think for any listener, I would say, look, it worked for me, and I can't really give anyone advice. But there is something I would like to say, because you said to women, and what I would like to say to other women is, be aware of what limitations you hold about your gender. And those are the limitations that we get every day from society, or maybe from someone specific who tells you can't do this or you can't do that. But it's also what you're holding inside yourself. There's this phrase, internalized misogyny, and I've been thinking about it a lot since I've moved here, because it's brought me up against a lot of things. Being here has made me think about a lot of stuff. And what I want to say is, I'm 5'1", right? Even if I stand on tiptoes, I'm 5'1". I weigh about 8 stone. I'm not very strong at all. Okay, I'm really small, and I have done this. I hunt, I shoot, I've learned to weld. I do mechanics here. I cut trees down. I run a chainsaw. I do this stuff every day, and it's not hand-to-hand combat. Okay, so I'm not working against someone else. I'm working within my own limits. And what I want to tell people is, like, nothing I've done requires a penis. Okay, it's a really important point, because most men will think this, and unfortunately, there's a lot of women that we may not even be aware of it, but I think we think this too. And I've sort of been aware more and more of the limitations I placed upon myself, even as a woman who's very feminist and very out there. I was still holding these things. I still hold these things. I won't be as good as a man. And I don't know where they come from, because Neil Cantwell, he couldn't do any mechanics. We've learnt that together. I'm a better shot. He's a fantastic cook. He's great with all the technology, computer stuff. But we moved here without the skills, and then we found what we could do. We found that naturally, not based on our gender. Yeah. And he doesn't hold those things, but they are within me. So I think it's just a really important thing I would like to say to other women is if you're not sure about something, just ask yourself, like, do I really need to be as strong as a big bloke to do it? Or is this something else that's holding me back, that makes me think I couldn't do it, or I shouldn't do it, or I'll make a fool of myself if I try? And that's the thing that I would like to share with listeners out there.
That's a really powerful message, and it really resonates with me, and I know it would with Amy as well. And part of the reason why we set up this podcast and why it's women telling stories about women is for those reasons. We want to share the stories of other women to empower our listeners. And I don't know, we might have some guys. I actually know some guys that have listened to the podcast as well already, and they've really enjoyed it. But yeah, the reason for this is to empower other women, and I think your message there is really powerful as well. So thank you very much for that. Really good. Just wrapping up, two quick things to ask you. One is, you mentioned that you're aged 50 at the moment. So what does life look like for the future? Is the Yukon your forever place now?
One thing that changed since I moved here is I don't plan. So we have no plans to leave, and I love it here. So I would say yes, but I'm also aware, after the last few years' experience, of how quickly life can change and things can happen. There will be a time limit on this for us, because it requires a lot of physical ability. And we can do things like get a water pump, but ultimately there's a 100-foot steep bank out there that's too it's too kind of overgrown and steep for us to get a track in. So we're always going to have to walk up it in the summer. So there's going to be a limit. We're always going to be getting in and out of boats and on and off snow machines. So but I don't know when that would be. But aside from that, we no longer plan. So we're happy here, and we intend to stay here, and that's that. We'll see what it's like tomorrow.
Excellent. And the other thing was just in terms of, you mentioned that you've got the rental income from the place in London, and Neil's got a remote job, I think you said. So in terms of your life and your fulfillment, are you doing things as well in terms of following your passion, or another form of employment out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's I do the management of the properties. That's kind of what I do for money. And it's a very intensive lifestyle here. I could only compare it really to living on a farm, which you guys will know a lot about. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So neither of us want to or can work full time. So Neil's got a consultancy business kind of, so he can just work, as and when he wants to. I can't do my job from here. I'm an actor. It's not going to work. But what I've been trying to do, because I did miss when I first moved here, first of all, it was just very exciting. But then after a while, I missed having a creative outlet because I've always worked in the creative industry since I was, since I went to Polytechnic. So I kind of miss that. So I've started writing again, like I used to write when I was younger. And I've actually gone back to that, and that has been that's a journey I'm at the beginning of, but it's been really good fun. I don't expect to make any money from it because writers never do. It's like acting, but I'm working on some short stories at the minute and a fictional novel. So I'm just sort of going to see what I can do with that. But as I said, I think it's a very, very long journey. So at the minute, I'm just trying to get stuff together and learn. The great thing with the internet is I'm doing little courses and things to kind of just teach me what I need to do. So that's my journey at the minute. But as I said, most of our life here is out there. It's we're doing stuff out there, whether it's hunting or mechanics or picking berries or getting wood. And that's the life we came here for, not to be sat in front of a computer for vast parts of the day. That was why. And we live very frugally. That's another thing to point out. There's not many things we can treat ourselves to in terms of luxury here. In fact, there's nothing at all. I can't even get a haircut or buy some nice clothes. There isn't that kind of thing. So we live frugally and make sure that we don't spend more than we've got coming in, so we don't have that worry about having to earn lots of money and leave here or give up our time here for that. So it's also a choice about how we want to live, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. And final question, because I know we've already shared your Instagram and your Facebook handle, and we'll put that in the show notes anyway. But final question for you. What does living life differently mean to you?
I mean, I think it's a very individual thing. And for me, it's about living life the best it can be and not being limited by things that don't matter. By that, I mean, things that other people do, what other people think, what the societal norms are, what gender norms are. And obviously, I do mean like living within the law and being kind to other people and not hurting other people. Of course, there are limits on, how you live. But I think the things that held me back and things that hold a lot of people back are like things within our own head. They're just like, fictions of our own imagination, or they're other people's fears or things that we worry that people might think about us if we do things. And for me, living life differently it's not about what you do. I've chosen to live in the bush, but it's not about what you do, it's about your attitude to it. And in fact, I could think of people who live here in the bush who choose to kind of fence themselves in and live in very kind of paranoid, hateful headspaces, people that I've come across. And me and Neil have done that too sometimes when we've got too stressed or worried about stuff. We've kind of completely fenced ourselves in. So it's not about where you are. I think the possibilities of what you do are endless. But it's about finding what makes your soul sing and then moving towards it.
And again, really wise words, finding what makes your soul sing. And I'm so glad that your stars aligned for you both, that you've been able to have this amazing opportunity to go and live your best life out in the Yukon. And we're both so grateful for you putting your time aside to speak to us tonight. And obviously, sorry, Amy couldn't join us for the whole conversation, but she was integral in asking all of these poignant questions as well. So Louise, just thank you so much for the chat tonight. I really do hope we get the opportunity to speak with you again. And I'm sure our listeners will find this quite an inspirational podcast episode. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really good fun to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast. We hope that Louise's story has been inspiring and maybe helped you to think about taking your own leap of faith into the unknown.
This was, I think, our longest podcast episode, and it was really difficult to stop asking questions of Louise because I just found her and Neil's story absolutely intriguing. I'd love to meet them both one day. I'm not sure how quickly we'll get out to the Yukon, but
we can't even get out the garden.
Yeah, we haven't left yet, but what an amazing adventure in life. Absolutely brilliant.
So for those of you that don't know Ali and I personally, we applied to go on a TV show to go out to Alaska. So a lot of the skills and stuff that Louise has shown that she's just managed to obtain, learn herself or be taught things, they were all things that we were quite interested in learning to begin with. Don't think we'd ever have got as good as she has, but yeah, really, really inspiring that she's achieved everything she wants to do.
I think as well it was really nice to hear about the harsh realities of that kind of life, because I think, you know, maybe for us and maybe some other people, we might paint this picture of living in the wilderness and how lovely and romantic and epic it is, but actually the reality is it's harsh, it's brutal, but there are still so many great things about it as well.
So if you've enjoyed this episode, we'd be very grateful if you could share it with your friends and family so that we can reach more people with these amazing stories. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
And if you're enjoying the stories that we're sharing and would like to support us in some small way, then you can visit our profile on buymeacoffee.com/themojos. That link is in the show notes. That way you can either buy us a coffee or become a regular supporter, and that all helps with the work that we're doing on this podcast. You can also follow our own adventures by connecting with our website and social media channels. Links are in the show notes.
Feel free to reach out and say hi. We'd love to know what you think of our podcast so far and where you're listening from. That's it from us for now. Look forward to connecting with you on the next show. Take care and stay safe.